It's here.
The Marriage You Want is out. It is launched. Yep. Welcome to the Bare Marriage Podcast. I'm Sheila Ray Gregoire from baremarriage.com, where we like to talk about healthy, evidence-based biblical advice for your sex life and your marriage. And I am joined in this special launch week by my husband and co-author, Keith.
Hey, everybody.
And it's Thursday.
Yes.
Which means the book's been out for 2 days.
Yes.
Although we're recording this last week.
Yes.
So I'm hoping everything went, assuming everything went fine.
Timing is weird. Right?
And hopefully the reviews are starting to come in on Amazon. We had a whole bunch on Goodreads last week. And this is exciting.
It's exciting. And a lot of people are saying a lot of really good things already. So it's nice to see.
Yeah, we are going to change the evangelical conversation about marriage. So I thought on this podcast, we could take a bit of a bird's eye view of what it is that we wanted to do with this book, a little bit of the story of the book, why we wrote it, etc. And, you know, this was one of those books that I wasn't actually planning on writing. I wasn't even originally that excited about writing it because we were writing about sex so much. And then we went to Zondervan with our idea for the Great Sex Rescue. Right. And they didn't like the idea. They thought that it wouldn't sell.
They thought there wasn't really a market for it. They thought there was enough books about sex, I think is what they thought. Right?
Well, yeah, but they wanted the Good Guy's Guide to Great Sex. Right. So they gave us a contract for the Good Guy's Guide and for an unknown marriage book, you know, that we were going to write at a future date. And I'm glad they gave us a contract, The Good Guy's Guide to Great Sex. It's a great book. And they let me rewrite The Good Girl's Guide to Great Sex because I really wanted to, which is great. But then we ended up deciding to part ways and put our marriage book with Baker, which is what we did. And, you know, we had been writing about sex and we were like, do we even have anything to say about marriage? Like, I remember writing the chapter in this about affection going,
well, before you started writing it, you were like, what are we going to say?
Like, you know, it's just kind of obvious, isn't it? But then, oh no, we had so much to say once we saw the data from our survey. And absolutely. I'm just really, really excited about what this book can do.
Yeah, absolutely.
If you were to say the theme of our book in one word.
Yeah, that's what we've been talking about.
What would it be?
Teamwork.
Teamwork, exactly. And before we get into our book, I actually want to do something that I haven't done before on the podcast. I want to do a devotion. Oh, okay. Can we do that?
Yeah, of course.
Okay.
It's your podcast.
Yeah. So I have my Bible here in this lovely Bible case from Ever AJ Bible Cases. They were one of our sponsors a while back, and they sent me this Bible case, which is just lovely. And I want to read to you from Isaiah 40. Okay. Got to get my reading glasses. Here we go. Now, Isaiah 40 is one of those beautiful chapters. It's really heavily quoted. One of the most quoted chapters from Isaiah. It ends with those beautiful verses. You know, whoever waits upon the Lord will renew their strength. Yeah. They shall rise up on wings like eagles. They shall run and not grow weary. They shall walk and not grow faint. But that chapter opens with this idea of comfort for God's people and what God wants to do for Israel. And he says this, a voice of one calling in the desert, prepare the way for the Lord. Make straight in the wilderness a highway for our God. Every valley shall be raised up, every mountain and hill made low. The rough ground shall become level, and the rugged places a plain, and the glory of the Lord will be revealed, and all humankind together will see it, for the mouth of the Lord has spoken. And I love that image of how when God comes and does something, one of the big things he does is he brings the mountains down and he brings the valleys up and he gives us straight ground. Yeah. And that picture of bringing what is high down and bringing what is low up is really the theme of our book. Right. In a lot of ways. Because, you know, what we're saying in The Marriage You Want is that we need to be on a level playing field. Yep. Right? We need to be approaching this marriage as partnership. And my concern is that in the evangelical church and the Christian world as a whole, I think when it comes to advice, we are giving the right advice to the wrong people. Right. Because God's plan is that the mountains be made low and the valleys be made high. Right. So the things that are high need to be brought down. The things that are low need to be brought up. But I fear that what we do is we give advice to those who are high that helps them get higher. And we give advice to those who are low that makes them go lower. Yeah. Yeah. I see what you mean. Yeah. And that's what we've done for marriage. Because the Bible has advice for both things. Okay, I'm going to put you on the spot. All right.
Right, okay.
You do not have to give me an exhaustive list. All right.
Okay.
Okay.
And I'm not prepped for this, everyone.
No.
So
But what kinds of advice, like if you think about phrases or verses or words or advice from the Bible, commands in the Bible, that would be about going lower. What would you say?
well, the story of what Jesus says, when you're invited to a feast, take the low spot so
Right.
that someone, someone can tell you to go higher.
Yeah.
Or, greater love has no one than this, that someone lay their life down for their friends. That sort of thing, like putting yourself behind others and letting others be more, giving your life for other people.
Yeah. Yeah.
Does that make sense? Is that what you're thinking about?
Yeah. And even verses like, be gentle and humble.
Yep.
Submit.
Yeah, have the same mind as Christ, who even though he, who didn't consider equality with God something to be grasped, but, emptied himself, that sort of thing.
Yeah, from Philippians 2. Yeah. So all of those verses are really important.
Yeah.
And they're all great. And we need to hold them with reverence.
Yes.
And honor them, right?
Yes.
But then there are also other verses about lifting up. Things like telling people to fight for justice.
Right.
Right? Telling people to speak up.
Mm-hmm.
To say to say what God has given you to say. Mm-hmm. Like there's lots of people in the Old Testament who fought for their rights. I think of Tamar,
right.
in the Old Testament, Ruth, Esther, all of them fought and spoke up for what they were owed and for what was right.
Sure. There's a lot. Yeah. There's a lot of militant take the ground kind of stuff in the Bible. And there's a lot of stuff like lay your life down in the Bible. There's both messages.
Right. Yeah. Be strong and courageous.
Yeah.
Like go and fight the battle. Like there's lots of messages about that tell you to lift higher.
Yeah.
And there's lots of messages that tell you to go lower.
Yeah.
And I fear what's happened when it comes to marriage is that we have told those who are already high, be strong and courageous, speak up, go and take what the Lord has given for you. And so, and be a leader. So the people who are already high, we're telling, hey, be a leader, do all of these great things.
Yeah.
But then the people who are already low, we're saying, submit, be gentle and humble, watch your tone of voice. Remember that you're not to be served, but to serve.
And the fact that some people, the way society has structured things, some people are higher or have more power or have more authority or more, abilities in society. We sort of baptize that and say, well, then God must want it to be that way. Mm-hmm. So that's the way God made the world. So you need to learn to submit, you people who are low. And we miss the fact that through the entire Bible, like for instance, the idea that the firstborn is the preeminent child.
Yeah.
Is constantly overturned. Like it's always the underdog.
Yeah.
Like David is the king, and he was like
the youngest son.
He was the youngest son. They didn't even think of him until the end. Yeah. Right?
Yeah.
Like that's what God is doing through the whole Bible. So we as Christians, we ought to be finding the low and raising them up instead of trying to make sure that the people who are up stay up.
Yes.
Which is, it seems to me a lot of energy is being expended in the church to make sure that people who are up stay up.
Yeah.
Because that's the way God wanted it to be.
Yeah.
And it's like you're missing the whole point of the Bible then, because God makes the low high and the high brings the high low.
Right. And that's what God wants to do. When the way that we know that God is coming in Isaiah 40.
Yeah. This is a prophecy of the arrival of Christ, right?
Is that the low the lower brought up and the higher brought down. So there's a level playing field.
Yeah.
And that's what our marriage book does. Is it says, hey, if you've been high up, if you've been a little bit entitled, you need to be brought down. Yeah. And if you haven't had your needs met,
if you've disappeared and you've made yourself nothing, God wants you to show up in your marriage and be who he created you to be.
Yeah. You get to use your voice. You get to show up with everything that you are. Yeah. And yes, often that is a gendered thing.
Yeah,
often, not always. Yeah, but often it is a gendered thing.
Well, the way that we've taught marriage in the Christian church predisposes us to that because we've taught specifically the role. Like first of all, as soon as you start talking about roles, like divided by gender, right? Then it's like the role of the man is to be preeminent, yes, and the role of the woman is to fade into the background, yes. And it's like that's not healthy.
No, it really is.
But that's what we're teaching.
It is. It absolutely is.
That's not what we're teaching. That's what the church has been teaching.
The church has been teaching. And what it's done is it's hurt people. And that's what we found over and over again in our data, is that when somebody is entitled by which we mean that they get things, they get more than they get more than their spouse does without having to do the work for those things.
Yeah.
So,
and we teach people to be entitled without realizing they're entitled.
Yeah.
Like I was very entitled as a husband because I internalized a lot of ideas about what it means to be the husband in a marriage. And I would never thought I was entitled. I would have thought I'm just living out my godly role.
right.
Right? Like even though that was something that it never really was a big part of who I was, just it was so in the water that I was very entitled early in our marriage, and it really caused a lot of harm, and I had to learn to see that and step out of that, right?
Yeah. And we've been talking about this for years on the podcast about entitlement when it comes to sex.
Yeah.
Right? How, like, after the postpartum phase, how many books talk about how the biggest thing that she needs to worry about is to make sure that he still gets the same number of orgasms he did before. Like, it's crazy stuff.
So when that's the norm, you know, it like men are naturally going to think about sex in a certain way, which is unhealthy.
Which is unhealthy.
As opposed to thinking that, hey, this is something for both of us. It's not an entitlement for me. You know, like now that I'm married, this is something I have a right to.
Right.
That's you think very differently about marriage when you don't think in that sort of terms.
Yeah. Yeah. But it's not just sex.
Yeah,
it's
absolutely.
also, you know, we saw it in our data. We saw it tremendously. Some of the things that surprised me was even the idea of kin keeping.
Yeah.
Okay. Joanna insisted we put this in the survey, and I'm like, does it matter? Like, is it that big a deal?
Yeah.
And I couldn't believe how much it mattered. So here's what we measured. Okay. We asked people, who takes care of your mother's birthday? Like if something needs to be tended to in your family of origin, you know, anniversary party, birthday card, Christmas gift, etc., who does it? You or your spouse? And then who takes care of your spouses, you or your spouse? Yeah. And I think, I don't remember the exact percentages, but it was like in about half of families, everyone took care of their own family of origin. So, you know, everyone bought their own mom a birthday card. But in the other half, she did it for both of them.
Yeah.
There were very, very, very few families where he did it for both of them.
Yeah.
And we saw that with medical and dental appointments too. Like, you know, in about half of marriages, it might have been 60%. I can't remember.
Right.
They did it each themselves. But then in the rest of them, she did it for both of them.
The vast majority of time, it was the woman that was in charge of those things.
Yeah.
Not the man.
Yeah. If one person alone was going to do it, it was her.
Yeah, typically.
And it really affects marital satisfaction. It causes it to really plummet for both people.
And people don't realize that's what's causing their satisfaction to plummet because they don't even realize they're doing it because it's so internalized.
And we're not trying to say that like looking after your spouse's like if she's looking after. If I buy your mom her birthday present and our marriage is bad, it's not because I'm buying your mom her birthday present. It's because there's a way that we are doing marriage that includes me buying your mom her birthday present. And that hurts.
Exactly. Yeah. And that's where I was going. It's so internalized because it flows from our assumptions of, you know, masculinity and femininity.
Yeah.
So like men are not relational, women are. So therefore it's natural. You would take care of my families and you would know everything that's going on in my family, but I wouldn't know what's going on in your family. That's totally normal.
Right.
Because of the way that we see that. And the problem is that is not healthy. Like that creates unhealthy men because if you're not relational, like that's part of being a human being.
Yeah.
Right? Like you're a more fulfilled human if you're more relational. So instead we should be challenging those stereotypes. So finding that unbalanced kin keeping causes less marital satisfaction. I hope this book will motivate people, you know, whether it's the man or the woman, to be more involved, to be more relational with the people who are close to them, because we'll all be healthier.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And so yes, what we saw over and over again, like with housework, and we've talked about this on a few podcasts now, is that when things are imbalanced, they tend to be imbalanced against her. Yeah. Right. And for him. So she tends to be taking on more of the load, but that isn't always true. Yeah. Right. There are some marriages where she's the one who's really entitled. Yeah. And that's why in our book, we don't make things gendered. Like we do draw attention to certain areas that are just kind of like, like when housework is imbalanced, it does tend to be in her direction. And guys, you got to pick up the slack. Or things like emotional intelligence, emotional maturity, etc. Like women do tend to have an easier time talking about their emotions than men. That is not biological. That is a social construct.
Exactly. Exactly. It's the same as the multitasking thing.
Yes.
It's just practice.
It's just practice,
Right.
and guys can learn it too. So obviously we mention gender, but more importantly, we talk about, hey, this is what an even playing field looks like, and make sure you're on that even playing field.
Yeah.
Because that's what God wants for us, right? He wants the mountains brought down, and he wants the valleys lifted high. And the only way we're going to have a good marriage is if we can truly embrace the idea of an even playing field.
Yeah.
Yeah. And that's not the message of other marriage books.
No. Oh, well, I mean, a lot of these books that we've talked about over the last year too, like The Marriage on the Rock with Jimmy Evans and that sort of stuff. You know, a lot of these things, all of the personal growth and development stuff, in terms of like relationship oriented, in terms of being psychologically healthy, all that stuff, those are all woman traits.
Yeah.
And so basically what they teach is the man gets to do whatever he wants, and the woman has to fill in the gaps for his undeveloped psychology. Right. And it's just sad, because I think men are better than that, and I think men can be relationship oriented. Men can be good at a lot of these things. They can manage a household, they can multitask, they can do these things if they put the energy into it. But we just have to be courageous and do it, and not be afraid of looking silly for a little bit, because we're not used to it.
And the good news is that when you do it, marriage really gets a lot better.
Yeah, absolutely.
And that's what we found.
And it's just justice.
It is.
Like, it's not a male-female thing. If one person is doing more than their share of the housework, that's not fair, whoever it is. Right? If one person has to be the one to make things right when you have a conflict every time, that's not fair. That's going to wear on a marriage over time. And we just need to say it. Right? And
so
we haven't said it in the past. The church hasn't said it in the past, but it needs to be said.
And so that's what we did in this book, is we just went where the data took us.
Yeah, I mean, that was the whole point of writing this book, is we want to see what actually works. Yeah.
So our theme of the book was teamwork, but our value, I think, was data, right? Like we're going to do everything about data. Yeah.
So it takes me back to like a long time ago when we were speaking to one of my colleagues, right? We had been at a marriage conference, and we'd spoken at a marriage conference, and then we just kind of mentioned that to her. And her first question was, well, what evidence do you have that what you teach actually works? Which I found really fascinating, because, you know, well, we're just teaching what's from the Bible, so it's got to be right? But she said, well, how do you know it works? And it's like, actually, that's a good question. To be honest, we hadn't thought about that. We just were teaching what we've been taught, and what, you know, it's from the Bible. It's got to be right. You know, so.
And at the time, we were fairly young, and you know, we had this manual that we were following along from this big organization, and it was like, well, obviously they must know what they're talking about, because they've been doing this forever. And so even though a lot of what we were teaching, we're like, this isn't really how marriage works for us. We felt like we had to talk about it, because they must know better than we did.
Yeah. Well, and that's normal. I think in most fields, people traditionally have looked to experts, right? So people who have experience in an area, people who've done things for decades, we sort of think they must know the material, and therefore what they say must be truthful.
Right.
And a lot of the times that is the case.
Yeah.
But it's not always the case.
Especially in the Christian church,
right?
Especially in the evangelical church.
You know, I mean, like, and I'm a physician, and the colleague who asked me that question was a physician as well too. And one of the big things in medicine is we do something that's called evidence-based medicine these days. And evidence-based medicine means that you need to, you know, weigh the strength of the evidence behind what you're doing.
Right.
So if there is a category in evidence-based medicine for expert opinion.
Yeah.
Right? So expert opinion is that you should do this. And that has some weight. But a trial where they actually run the drug, and they give half people a placebo and half people the drug, and they see who got better, that has a lot more weight, because personal experience can be biased, and you can think something's working because you really want it to work, but it's not actually working. Or you might not notice the effect of something because it doesn't help everybody, but it helps majority, but not everybody. And so you think maybe it's not working, or you're not sure if it's working. So you know, in medicine we have a lot of levels of evidence, and we weigh them and we do what actually works based on the data, because that's much more objective than our subjective feeling of whether it's working or not.
Right.
Does that make sense?
Yeah. And medicine, of course, can actually do experiments. We can't do experiments when it comes to marriage, because you can't assign some people to act a certain way and some people to act
That's
another.
right. Yeah.
So the closest that we can get is these kinds of surveys.
Yeah. And there's even levels of these kind of surveys, right? So there's like we've talked about this in the podcast before, where like the studies that you did for The Great Sex Rescue and the studies that we did for our book, The Marriage You Want, are very different than just questions of what are people's experience in marriage, right? So we did questions where we said, what do you believe about X, Y, Z? But we also had questions about marital satisfaction and how they manage conflict and that sort of thing.
Right.
So we could compare how people answered a question to how they actually managed conflict, or what they believed about something to how strong their marriage was.
And I need to jump in here, because one of the criticisms we often get, which isn't even true, but when people discount our stuff, they say, "Oh, she just surveyed people who agreed with her."
Yeah.
Which is so funny. It just proves they don't know what they're talking about.
Yeah.
Because almost all the stats in our books are odds ratios, by which I mean we are measuring people who do believe one thing with people who don't believe it, and then seeing how they compare. Or people who do act this way and people who don't act this way, and see how they compare. So if everyone that we surveyed believed or acted exactly the same way as we did, we would have no findings.
Yeah. or if they believed and acted exactly the opposite of us, right?
Yeah.
It's like you have to have two groups, people who believe something and people who don't.
Yes.
Right?
So it's just a really dumb critique that we often get.
Again,
that
and it's
ignorant people throw at us.
Yeah, it's a way of discounting because they don't want to go where the data leads.
Right.
Because that's the issue, is that in Christian marriage, it's like my mind is made up, don't confuse me with the facts.
Yeah.
Is kind of the mentality. I know that God's view for marriage is this way, therefore that is good, therefore that's the way we will do it.
Yes.
And then we say, well, this evidence shows that that's not good. Maybe you should rethink your marriage.
Yeah.
Maybe you should rethink your view of what God thinks marriage should look like. There's no way I'm doing that. So I will ignore reality to preserve my idea of what I think God wants marriage to be.
Yeah.
Because I will not allow myself to be persuaded that it should be different.
Right.
It's like, that's the exact opposite of what the Bible teaches. I mean, the Bereans studied the word themselves. So if John MacArthur is telling you that a husband does this and a wife does that, and that doesn't work out, you should go back to the Bible and not listen to John MacArthur anymore.
Exactly.
Right? Like that's what the Bible tells us to do.
Yeah.
I mean, Jesus said, you will know them by their fruit.
Yeah.
So if the fruit that's being produced is a marriage that's not as flourishing as it could be, that should tell you something.
It should. And what we did in this book is we went where the data went.
Yeah.
And we didn't hide behind anything. And
yeah, well, because Jesus Christ said, I am the truth.
Yeah.
So if we find something in the world, if we find something in our surveys that kind of goes like, I didn't think that was the way that things were, we shouldn't be afraid of that. We should go, oh, why is that? Like we should dig into that. We shouldn't be afraid, because Jesus is the truth. We should not be afraid of looking for truth.
Yeah. And what we found so funny, and I know Rebecca's mentioned this on the podcast a couple times before, but like when Shanti Felton did her original survey of women for her book For Men Only, and she asked about libidos, she actually found that the majority of women either had the same or higher libido than their husbands. And she makes such a big deal about how her surveys are accurate because they're nationally representative, which again only matters if you're talking to the general population, which she wasn't. She was trying to talk to Christians. So actually having a nationally representative survey is not helpful. You need to have a survey of your audience.
It's a bunch of words that sound impressive, but they actually don't really relate to what you're talking about.
Right. But anyway, she makes such a big deal out of this. But then what she did was she puts in a footnote of her book that she discounted all of the people, all of the women who said that they had higher libidos, because that's not what the men said. And
well, she said we couldn't verify with their husbands if that was the case.
Yeah.
So women said they had a higher or the same libido as their husbands, but we couldn't check with their husbands. So we're going to assume they had a lower libido, because we all know that women have lower libidos.
And it's like, I just can't believe that she got away with that.
Yeah.
Because that's just so.
And this is exactly what I said. My mind is made up. Don't confuse me with the facts, right?
Yeah.
we know that women have lower libidos, and we know that women are not having enough sex, and we know that we need to tell women to have more sex in the church because that's what we need to do.
Now I need to jump in. I need to jump in for a minute here, because I am not saying that I believe that the majority of Christian women have the same or higher libidos. And we did find that I think it was 56% of men have the higher libido, and then the rest it's either shared or she has the higher libido. But we also know that teachings in the evangelical church artificially lower women's libidos.
Well, exactly.
And so you would expect that women in the secular world would have higher libidos.
Yeah.
So I think both of us were correct. I think her nationally representative survey was correct in that, in the general population, women do have higher libidos. Yeah. I also think that ours was correct because we found evidence that a lot of messages do lower women's libidos, like the idea that all men struggle with lust, it's every man's battle, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah. But in 2006, when For Men Only was written, the prevailing mindset was, in Christian marriages, like it was the devil wants you to have as much sex before you get married and as little sex after. Yeah. Like that was I
used to quote that. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
That was what was being taught, right? And the concept was that women needed to realize that they didn't want sex, but their husbands did. And so they needed to give it to them.
Right.
That was what was being taught.
Yeah.
Okay. Then Shanti does this survey that shows, lo and behold, the difference in libido between men and women is not astronomical like we thought. Yeah. And this was a teachable moment.
Yeah.
Right? Because if at that point people had said, wait a minute, if the libido of women is not that much lower than men, why is it that we feel there's this crisis in Christian marriages where men aren't getting the sex they want and women don't seem to want it? Why is that happening then? Well, we know it's because women just don't want it, so we'll just say that. But our study showed that that's not the reason. Well, we're just going to ignore the data of our study because we know that's what's the case. And this is the amazing thing is 15 years later, in 2021, you wrote The Great Sex Rescue, which answered the question. Yeah. Which is that basically, in Christian marriages, sex is not as good as it could be because the pleasure and the enjoyment of the woman and mutuality and all those things that make a good sexual experience for women is largely ignored in our Christian teaching. Yeah. And things that are distinctly harmful to women and their sexuality is actively taught. Yeah. Right? And so if we asked the question 15 years earlier in 2006 when we saw the data wasn't lining up with our preconceived notions, we could have saved a lot of heartache. Yeah. But even today, 4 years after GSR is out, nobody has admitted you were right. I know. They've all started to slowly shift their positions. Yeah. The people used to teach these things. Like, you're the person that used to teach those things. Yeah. Right? But nobody's acknowledged that, we should have, in 2006, when Shanti was finding this data that, women's sex drives are not as low as men's, we should have said, well, why is it that they're not enjoying it then? It would have been so much better.
It would have been, but they didn't.
But we're scared because they didn't want to challenge the status quo and the preconceived notions of what marriage should look like. Yeah. Right? And the idea that a woman with a vibrant sex drive and a man with a vibrant sex drive can both use that in a holy way toward God, in a healthy marriage. That was just not on the table because that sounds too much like equality. Yeah. And that's from the devil. Yes. Because we know that men being in charge is from God. That was, I know it's ridiculous, but that's kind of the way it seems to me. Yeah. So
I know it really is crazy. Yeah. And so we wanted to go where the data leads. Yeah. And the data led to partnership.
And this is the funny thing is because you were like this with GSR, but you were also like on this book, The Marriage You Want as well. You were like, well, what if it doesn't show what we think it shows?
What if it doesn't show it?
And I just said, then we'll tell people what it showed because we don't care. We just want the truth.
And we just want people to be happy and healthy.
So if it turns out that things we thought, were going to be, groundbreaking, amazing things aren't, we'll tell that. Yeah. And what happened was there's a lot of things that we didn't realize how big a deal it was. Yeah. And it's a huge deal. And so we had sections of the book which were going to be like small, a couple paragraphs, which we basically made a whole chapter because this is huge.
Yeah, we have to talk about this. Yeah. So here, let's show everyone the book.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. If you're watching on YouTube, Here's the book. There's a study guide that goes along with it too.
Oh, the study guide is amazing.
Yeah, it's so good. And it has premarital curriculum. It has discussions for small groups. It has personal journaling questions. It has a way that you can work through it with your spouse.
Yeah.
So if you just want an easier way to have these conversations with your spouse, it also has some great info on how to build emotional regulation and emotional, you know, just how you can connect emotionally.
Psychological health, right? Because a lot of times we don't teach. There are hard conversations in marriage. You know, we don't know how to do them well. And this book kind of goes through that step by step. It teaches you how to be the psychologically centered kind of person that can have discussions about what you feel your needs are in marriage.
Yeah.
Where you're able to express yourself without stomping the other person.
Right. So anyway, it's just, it's really wonderful. If you haven't bought it yet, please buy it, because we would love to get on some bestseller lists this month. If you don't want to buy it from Amazon, I know that there's some people boycotting Amazon right now. You can get it from Baker Books if you're within the United States for 30% off and free shipping right now. So, you know, go get them from Baker Books, or there's lots of other places you can buy it. We have all of the links, including to Amazon if you want to do that. But we have all the links in the podcast notes. There's a post where it takes you to everywhere you can buy it. It is also available on Audible or on audio, wherever you buy your audiobooks. And Keith and I are also narrating it too, which is kind of fun.
Yeah.
But
and the other thing too is that, you know, we're obviously very, you know, open about our egalitarian views. Okay. But this book is not preachy in that way.
Yeah.
It just talks about the data. It doesn't try to railroad people in any particular theological position. It just says what the data shows.
And that's actually something that we really do is, you know, we didn't go into the theology. We had an original version of the book where we did go into the theology of egalitarianism. And we're like, you know, we're not the experts in this.
Yeah.
And one of our big values is staying in your lane.
Yeah.
So we have a footnote pointing to some great, you know, Mark Mausko's website, Taryn Williams's book, Philip Payne's book, Beth Allison Barr's book, etc. But we really wanted to see where the data went. Yeah. And the data said that having a husband as a tiebreaker doesn't work. Yeah. And
people can just do with that what they want.
Yeah. Right? But we're not preachy about it. We're just saying, hey, it doesn't work. Here's the fruit. Yeah.
So you don't need to worry about sending it to your more conservative, you know, family members as a gift.
Right.
It's still very Christian. It talks about, it's very biblical. It's very centered on Christian principles. You know, it's not going to feel uncomfortable. Similarly, I actually think too that we talk about spiritual things in a way that even a person who is more of a seeker or even a person who, you know, is not sure if they even believe anymore would still feel comfortable reading this book and would not feel attacked.
Yeah.
So I think this book will work for anybody.
And I think it resonates with Catholics as well. Yep. Like, you know, it really is. And, you know, I remember we were in a discussion with a big marriage organization about working with them a couple of years ago. And they were just reluctant to get too involved with us because we were so heavily associated with egalitarianism. And I remember saying to them, you know, I know that you want to appeal to everyone in the church. So you don't want to alienate the churches that are heavily complementarian, and you want to help those people build their marriage. But what if the main thing that is hurting evangelical marriages is this idea of authority that men have over women? Like, what if you can't actually help couples unless you deal with that head on?
Yeah.
And that's what we found, because we were actually wondering, can we write a book that doesn't address egalitarianism, that just is healthy overall, but doesn't take this on head on?
Yeah.
Because we do just want to replace those harmful books that are out there. We don't want people reading Love and Respect anymore. So can we write a book that isn't going to tick off or scare all your super conservative people? And we just realized, yeah, we could, but it wouldn't help.
Mm-hmm. Well, but what we did was we just said, this is what the data showed.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And we let people make their own conclusions.
Yeah.
As opposed to, so therefore,
yeah,
take that, complementarians.
Yeah,
there's none of that in the book. It's just, this is what the data showed.
Yeah.
So
And the charts are so pretty.
Well, and that's the cool thing, because the charts do two things. The first thing the charts do is the charts show you why we say what we say in the book. So we talk about what we think the principles are to make marriage healthy, but you can see why, because we just show you our work.
Yeah.
Right? The charts are our work. Like
this is so much in them. Yeah.
But the other thing is, we couldn't possibly talk about everything that's in those charts,
Yeah.
because it would be like a library, not a book.
Yeah.
Right? So you can look at these charts and find relations, between things that we never even mention in the book. Like, you can mine these charts for like weeks after you read the book.
Yeah,
I'm
super
sure.
fun conversation starters.
Yeah.
When I was talking about how we just wanted to replace the harmful books, and that actually was my motivation in writing this book. It's not like I felt some deep need to write a marriage book for my own sake. I have felt deep needs to write sex books because it was just so bad, the information that was out there. But I didn't feel the same calling to a marriage book. But after writing Great Sex Rescue and reading all of these terrible marriage books, I just realized we have a crisis in the church in that there are not healthy marriage books out there. Every week I get emails from pastors saying, I need a book for premarital curriculum. I don't know what to use. And for years I've just been telling them, well, it's secular, but John Gottman's good.
And the reason you like John Gottman is
because
because
he's
it's evidence-based. It's
Like,
based upon actual studies.
But I didn't have anything really healthy to recommend. And I prepared a report for a publishing company a couple of years ago. I think it was about 2 years ago. So some of these numbers might be a little bit off now, but I want to share it with people because I think it was really interesting. So here's the thing. All right.
Okay.
The best-selling Christian marriage books, the top 10 Christian marriage books, have not changed.
Right.
Like, which are the 10 best? They have not changed in almost 20 years significantly.
Yeah. So they're from 20 years ago.
Yeah.
And what they're basically doing was telling you to have a marriage that looked like 20 years before that.
Yeah, exactly. So here's the top 10, okay? And I'll read you the titles and the year they were published.
Okay.
And again, this may not be exactly accurate today, but
Because they do change a little bit.
They do change a little bit, but in general, these are the ones that if you look over the last decade, this is what sold. So 5 Love Languages from 1992, The Love Dare 2008, Love and Respect 2004, The Meaning of Marriage 2011, Boundaries in Marriage 1999, Power of a Praying Wife 1997, Sacred Marriage 2000, Cherish 2017, How We Love 2006, and For Women Only 2004. Okay. Yeah. So they're all pretty old. They're not new books. And like a new marriage book has not broken in a long time, which means there's room, people.
Yes.
There is room for the marriage you want to break in with your help. Okay. Yeah. Now here's what else is interesting about that list.
Okay.
Only one of them was published in the last decade. That's Cherish by Gary Thomas. Okay. Everything else is older than that. 3 of the top 10 were published in the last century. Okay. Only 2 were written by women.
Okay.
And another 2 were co-authored by a couple. Okay. So Meaning of Marriage and How We Love was a couple. For Women Only and Power of a Praying Wife were written by women. None was written by anyone of color. So none was written by any kind of minority of any kind. Only 2 of these books advise following best practice evidence-based things. Only 2. Wow. And even those 2 have a few issues, but I still recommend them. And that would be How We Love, which talks about attachment theory. They also like Steve Arterburn, and they follow Steve Arterburn about lust. So just warning you there. Yep. But what they do say about attachment theory is good. Yep. And Boundaries in Marriage.
Right.
So those 2, and which are fairly healthy, they're fairly healthy. But the other ones don't. Now, I dug a little bit.
Because the other ones start with I know what works for marriage.
Yeah.
And I'm just going to teach you that. And we won't look at whether or not it actually works.
Right. And we did a podcast just as we were starting to talk about the marriage you want, about that 5-point plan that unites almost all marriage books. Right. They start with a faulty premise and then 4 things follow from that. Yeah. And I'll put a link to that podcast. But basically, all evangelical marriage books start with the premise that husband is in authority over his wife. And then these 4 things follow from that. So therefore, the genders are totally different because there has to be a reason that men are in authority. So men and women are totally different and do not understand each other and will never understand each other.
Therefore, you can still be equals even though you're not really equals.
Right. And then they tell you that your expectations are the problem. So if you're not having a good marriage, if you're not enjoying your marriage, it's because you're expecting too much from your spouse. And when that doesn't work, they tell you, well, marriage is hard.
Yeah.
What did you
It's
expect?
meant to be hard. Yeah.
It's meant to make you holy, not happy. This is how God refines you. And when that doesn't work, they tell you, you can never get divorced and your reward is in heaven.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
And that tends to be the message of a lot of these books. The underlying message is it's really aimed at reminding you, don't expect anything. Marriage is hard. You need to remember to submit. The high stuff gets higher, the low stuff gets lower. Right? And that's what we see. Okay. Now, here's the thing. And this is what I am holding on to. Okay. And this is what I want people to hear very clearly. I don't think that these books that are being sold in such huge numbers still are actually being read.
I was going to say are being read.
I think that there's a real demand for healthy marriage books that isn't being met. And here's why. I have some evidence.
This young Christian couple's getting married. I need to give them a book on marriage based on Christian principles.
Yes.
So this is what we got. So I'm going to send it to them.
Right. So here's my evidence for that. Okay. I think most of these books are being bought as gifts.
Right.
They're not being bought to read. So, for example, Love and Respect, at the point that I wrote this, was ranked about 1,000 in physical books and 32,000 on Kindle, on Amazon. Yeah. And on Amazon, like your Kindle is always going to be way lower because there's so many books that are only ebooks. So your ranking in physical books is always going to be higher than your ranking in Kindle.
Right.
So that's what Love and Respect was. But if you look at the books on either side of them, so they're ranking 1,000 in physical copies too.
Right.
They're ranking 4,500 on Kindle or 15,000 on Kindle.
Right.
So a lot higher on Kindle.
Right.
So it looks like people are buying physical copies, but they're not buying Kindle, which means I think they're buying them as gifts, not to read.
Well, and the other thing too is that you've actually come out and said that, we've recommended Love and Respect in the past.
Yeah.
Because we hadn't read it.
Yeah.
But other people told us it was good.
Right.
So we assumed that they're Christians and it's a Christian author, so it must be good, and we've recommended it.
Yeah.
And then what happens is it just ends up on people's shelves and they go, oh, that's the book you buy when someone gets married.
Yes.
And no one's ever read the thing.
Yeah. Thank goodness. Hopefully not.
But then every once in a while a person reads it and feels guilty that they're not doing this stuff, which
Yeah.
is ridiculous.
Yeah, because when I talk to people, when I talk to Christians who get married, they say, oh yeah, I got a ton of books for my wedding. I got His Needs, Her Needs. I got Love and Respect. I got Power of Praying Wife. I never read them. They're just on my shelf.
Yeah.
And I hear that all the time.
Whereas I'm not the kind of person to typically write in books, but when the first time I read Love and Respect, it's full of pen marks. It's like excuse me, evidence.
this is
the opposite of what is reality. It's crazy. I was just going insane.
Yeah.
But I had recommended this book because people said it was good, and I just assumed they were right.
Yeah.
So I think that people are just doing that.
Love Dare. Okay, which was also ranking at about 1,000 in physical copies, ranked also around 32,000 on Kindle, but the books on either side of it were ranked 13,000 and 16,000 on Kindle. So again, you're seeing a big discrepancy.
Yeah, yeah.
So I think a lot of these books, they're being bought as gifts. They're being bought to do in Bible studies, maybe. They're being bought, whatever, but they're not necessarily being bought to read. So there's not a lot of demand from people who are like saying, you know what I need? I need to read a marriage book. Because, and you know what, I don't think there's anything wrong. If you want to read a book and you want a physical copy, that is awesome. But I'm just saying that usually there's a ratio.
It's an interesting
of physical to Kindle
phenomenon that's going on.
Yeah. And our book, all of our books, Great Sex Rescue, She Deserves Better, etc., they actually meet the ratio properly.
Yeah.
Like they meet the ratio where, people are actually reading this.
They seem to be books that people are reading for themselves as well.
And so do Boundaries in Marriage and How We Love. Like the healthy books tend to have proper ratios.
Right.
But the unhealthy books don't. And I think they're being bought by boomers primarily as wedding gifts.
Right.
Because they don't know what else to buy. And my prayer is that, when the boomers stop buying gifts, when they sort of age out of that, and I'm not trying to say I want the boomers to die. That's not what I mean. But when they age out of that, then maybe people will stop buying the unhealthy stuff. Yeah. And now we have something healthy to recommend. There is such room for a new book to break in because these books have been selling like hotcakes for 20, 30 years.
Yeah.
you know?
And a lot of people do end up picking them up and reading them, and they just blow past the stuff that's ridiculous.
Yeah.
And they're like, they basically are saying, "Okay, boomer,"
Yeah.
and they go, "Yeah, this is my great aunt who gave this to me. This makes sense that she would recommend this. I'm not going to do this in my marriage."
Right.
And so the book doesn't really harm them.
Yeah.
Or whatever. But some people do pick up the books and read them, and they really get hurt because they start thinking, I'm not a good enough husband or a good enough wife or whatever because I'm not meeting these, ridiculous ideas of what things are supposed to be. So our goal is just to have a book that people, if they do eventually, after they've been married for 10 years, pick it up and go, hey, maybe we should read that book we actually got at our wedding day.
Yes.
It will go, hey, we can even do better for the next 10 years because this book's helping us so much.
This book's awesome and it's fun and there's charts and it's evidence-based and like, think about that. So the majority of books on marriage were written before the porn apocalypse.
Oh,
right?
yeah.
The porn apocalypse was around 2008. That's when everyone got high-speed internet.
Yeah.
So like our best-selling books on marriage don't even account for something which is hugely affecting marriages today.
Yeah.
Right? It really is time for a change. And there's been such demand for a change. Like the number of emails I get, I need to use something for premarital counseling. I want to do a marriage study in our church. But what do I use when all of this stuff is terrible? And so it is time, people. And the time is here. The time is now. The book has been out for 2 days.
Yes.
And we can make a real difference.
Yeah.
But we're going to need your help.
Yep.
We are going to need your help because we cannot do this alone. Okay? If we're going to get this book selling, and if we're going to make it an evangelical Christian publishing bestseller, if we're going to break into the market so that when people are looking for marriage books, they think of ours, it's going to be because you guys say something. It's going to be because you guys speak up.
Yeah.
Because, we're not on the huge Christian media anymore.
Yeah.
We've largely been blacklisted from a lot of those places because we talk about taking the mountains lower and taking the valleys higher.
Yep.
And we talk about what actually works.
Yep.
And
because we say if someone's teaching something that doesn't work, we say that doesn't work.
Yeah.
It reminds me of that verse from Paul. Have I become your enemy by telling you the truth?
Yeah.
That's what it feels like a lot of the time, right?
Yes.
So we don't have those kind of resources. We don't have like plugs from big name organizations. So this needs to be a grassroots thing.
Yeah. And so
Sheila, tell them, what can they do to be part of this grassroots movement? What can I do to make, this book go really big?
Okay, well, let me tell you, Keith. Thank you for asking me. So buy it. First of all, buy it as a gift. Buy it for your friends. Buy it for your sister, your mom. Buy it for yourself, obviously. Listen to it. If your spouse likes listening more than reading, get them the audio version. It's so good. And even if you're boycotting Amazon, which is perfectly logical, you can still put it on your wish list. So you can put it on your wish list without actually buying it from Amazon. And that just, the more people put it on their wish list, the more it's going to be seen and shown to people. You can
How about
leave
reviews?
Reviews are gold. So you can leave a
If I write a
review.
review on like Goodreads and Amazon and
Yes.
would that be helpful?
It would be so helpful. We would love to see 200 reviews in the first 2 weeks. We're really praying for that. So you can write a review on Goodreads, which is really influential and important. If you buy it, you can write a review on Amazon and you'll be a verified purchaser, but you can also write a review on Amazon even if you haven't bought it from Amazon. So if you bought it somewhere else, you can still write a review on Amazon. They just won't necessarily highlight it quite as high, but it still counts and people will still see it. You can write a review on christianbook.com if you're in Australia and Coorong, et cetera, et cetera. And so please leave reviews. That helps us immensely. Share on social media. If you follow me on Instagram or Threads or Blue Sky or Facebook, share our posts and just let other people know about it.
Like, comment, subscribe.
Yeah, just do
all
anything
the
you
things.
can. Do anything you can to drive our engagement.
Hey, Sheila, what about if I recommend it to my counselor or my pastor so that
Yeah.
they can use it for other couples? What do you think? Would that be helpful?
One woman on our launch team sent a note to her pastor about the marriage you want and just said, we've been looking for a good marriage book as a church for a long time. And I think this is it. It's got a ton of charts. It's really evidence-based. It's really focused on scripture. Will you take a look at it? And he bought a copy, because she wrote that letter. And so people are speaking up, and it makes a difference because there is no reason that we should have 8 books in the top 10 marriage books that are not based on evidence-based practices.
Yeah.
There is no reason that our biggest marriage books should be so old and so out of touch. Yes. We can do better. This next generation can do better.
Yes.
And I'm really excited to see what the Marriage You Want does. I'm really excited to see the conversations it starts, especially around mental load and housework. It's about time we had a Christian marriage book that talked about the one thing that matters most when it comes to marital satisfaction. So please pick it up. It would mean so much to us. And we're just looking forward to hearing what everyone has to say about the book. And speaking of that, can I read a review from Goodreads?
Of course, that sounds great.
Okay, here's one that came in last week on Goodreads. It says, I've been following Sheila Gregoire for a couple of years now. When I saw she had a book on marriage, I could not have gotten my hands on the book faster. I love people like that. I love how this book breaks down different aspects of marriage and how to have a more balanced approach, aka teamwork. This book is stockpiled with research, data, and scripture. I had so many aha moments throughout this book. It helped me to have the language to better articulate my frustration moments, but it's also shown me practical ways I can better love and support my spouse. This is not your typical Christian marriage book, leaving you feeling less than and in need to just do more. It gets to the root of issues and practical steps to better love, support, and connect with your spouse.
That's great.
Isn't that lovely?
That's so good.
Yeah.
Yeah, we were really trying to make this book not a big, giant to-do list, but actually evidence-based things that can actually help your marriage.
Yeah.
Get better.
Lots and lots of practical tips in it.
Yeah.
Lots and lots of little things that you can put into your life that can make the biggest difference. And so, yeah. Yeah. So, and we, and I want to say thank you to the people who were on our launch team. Our launch team is going to keep going for a couple of weeks as we get all the reviews in, but they were just such an encouragement to us.
Yeah.
And then of course our Patreon people who help support us on a monthly basis, even with just as little as $5 a month. And we have an exclusive Facebook group, and they helped us fund our research, which is so important. Yeah. And then our donors too, through the Good Fruit Faith Initiative of the Bosco Foundation. So if you want to join our Patreon, if you want to donate money, it's tax deductible within the United States and more. The links for that are in the podcast notes too. So thank you. Enjoy this launch week for the Marriage You Want, and get ready for next week on the podcast, which is going to be awesome because there is another book launching.
Right.
Another book. And it is by Beth Allison Barr, who wrote The Making of Biblical Womanhood, and she now has Becoming the Pastor's Wife. And Beth is going to be joining us next week. And then the week after that, we are doing a big free webinar, Beth and me. So there's a link in the podcast notes where you can sign up for that. So she'll be on the podcast next week. But then Karen Swallow Pryor is going to host a webinar for Beth and me as we go over what we think of each other's books and answer questions and so much more. I don't know what we're going to call it yet. We are having a debate on Threads about what we're going to call it. I came up with like burning our umbrellas.
Because the Gothard
the
umbrella of authority kind of stuff. Yeah,
people have come up with a bunch of other things. So we're still working that out. Yeah. But by the time this podcast airs, I'm sure we will have figured it out. And the link to sign up for that webinar is in the podcast notes. And join us next week when Beth will be here. So thank you, everybody. When you go to, if you want to buy The Marriage You Want from the Baker book site, you can also buy Beth's book at the same time because they're by the same publisher. So you can get Becoming the Pastor's Wife and The Marriage You Want and The Marriage You Want study guide, all at the Baker site, or you can get it anywhere you buy books. Kurong, Indigo, Amazon, bookshop.org, anywhere. So thank you for supporting us. Thank you for writing reviews, and thank you for showing up every week. We appreciate you. You keep us going.
Yep.
And we'll see you again next week. Okay. Bye-bye.